The holodeck resolves around them as a dark municipal tunnel with a shallow river running through its center. Not a sewer too clean, too deliberate, but an underground flood control channel, concrete walls, curved overhead, inspection lights, spaced far enough apart that every pool of brightness has darkness on both sides. Four orange dry suits hang from hooks. A narrow maintenance cart waits on rails beside the water. Its steel bed holds four waterproof cases, a coil of rope, a label printer, and a battered terminal with no network connection. Cole looks down the tunnel where branching culverts vanish behind numbered gates. Okay, this is good. No whiteboard, no tasteful workshop. If our runtime makes a claim, the claim goes on a physical tag. If it cannot show its license, it does not cross a gate. If it fails, we walk the shortest route to the failure instead of admiring the architecture from here.
Lex lifts one of the dry suits and discovers that its chest is printed with a single word, witness. For anyone arriving late, he says, smiling at the severity of the place, we came here because each of us wanted some version of the same thing, a minimal capability runtime, a small system that can say what an agent is allowed to do, emit claims whose authority can be inspected, discover the shortest sequence that breaks a promise, and then widen that sequence into the surrounding causes. The tunnel is apparently going to make us prove it with our bodies. He glances at the gates downstream, and this matters because a capable system that merely succeeds is not enough. We need to know when it had the right to succeed and why it failed when it did not.
Boris opens the first waterproof case. Inside are palm-sized metal tokens, each etched with a capability: resensor, open gate, print claim, delegate, revoke, and redless. Beneath them sits a compact scanner with one green light and one red light. Minimal enough to argue with, he says. I like that the verbs are finite. I also dislike it, which is probably useful. He places open gate against the scanner. The red light flashes. The terminal prints a narrow strip. Dinid, no principal, no scope, no pert, no expiry. Good. Default denial, structured reason, machine-readable receipt. But we should be careful. A runtime that can explain denial beautifully may still be useless. We need a job it must complete.
Andrej is already examining the cart's axle and the grooves in the wall. The job is to get a sample canister from here to the outflow chamber without flooding the wrong branch. He points to a transparent cylinder clipped under the terminal. A blue bead of light pulses inside it. We have partial sensors, gates with local controllers, and some actuator permissions. Every action becomes a license claim: principal, verb, object, evidence, authority, time, and maybe lineage. Then we inject a fault and ask for the shortest failing trace. He pauses beside, "This one is not decorative. If the system cannot establish that a gate closed, none do must survive all the way to the operator. No laundering it into completion, because the next step would be convenient."
Cole pulls on the witness suit but leaves it unzipped. I want to separate three things before Boris gives them one elegant type. Capability is permission to attempt an action. Claim is a statement about what happened or what is true. License is the evidence and authority under which the claim may be relied upon. If we collapse those, possession of open gate becomes proof that the gate opened. That is exactly the kind of clean lie systems love. He picks up three tokens and sets them on the cart with gaps between them. Permission, event, reliance. Consequence crosses each boundary differently. The runtime should make the crossings inspectable, not pretend the noun solves them.
I wasn't going to give them one type, Boris says, then gives Cole a sideways look. I was going to give them three types and a generic parameter that would eventually make you angry. He turns the terminal toward them. Its screen contains a tiny empty file named runtime.ts. Let's earn the abstraction: one principle, us acting through the cart; one objective, deliver sample S to chamber O; one policy, gate actions require local sensor evidence no older than 30 seconds issued by a controller licensed for that gate; claims can cite claims; revocation invalidates descendants that depend on the revoked edge. That's enough to move.
Lex clips the sample cylinder to the cart. Who is us? He asks. Not philosophically, operationally. Four people can disagree. Does the cart aggregate our authority? Does one person hold the capability while another witnesses? And if I remain silent, has the system interpreted silence as consent? He places his hand near the scanner without touching it. I have been thinking about silence as something that can create pressure while preserving innocence. A runtime can do the same. It can say, no objection was recorded, and turn absence into permission. I would rather require affirmative authority for irreversible actions and allow silence only to preserve the current safe state.
Yes, but do not make every read require a constitutional convention. Andrej sits on the cart's edge and begins typing. Authority should be scoped by effect. Reading water level is low consequence. Opening a gate is high consequence. Delegating open gate is higher because it changes future possibility. The minimal model can have an effect class and a threshold. For the first run, the cart can read autonomously, propose a route, and print claims. One human authorizes each gate opening. 2 humans authorize delegation or override. Revocation can be unilateral if it only reduces authority. He looks at Lex. Silence grants nothing except permission for already safe processes to remain stopped.
And stopping is an action with a cost, Cole says. Name who pays it. He steps onto the maintenance cart. The suspension dips and a dormant motor wakes. If we halt here, the sample may expire. Default safe is not consequence free. It just selects the consequence we find easier to defend. So the claim should say not only denied, but what continues while denied. Sample clock continues, water rises, downstream request remains unmet. Refusal is honest when it names what it protects and what still happens. He taps the label printer. Print that. Otherwise, the system manufactures moral cleanliness out of omission.
Boris adds fields. The terminal's spare interface takes shape: actor, action, target, authority, evidence, observed result, confidence, dependencies, and continuing effects. There, no poetry field. He types a first request. Cart requests resensors gate G1 for purpose moot S to O. Expires in 30 seconds. The scanner turns green. A label emerges, and Boris sticks it to the cart rail. License to observe, not license to infer beyond the sensor's contract. Let's see what the world does. He pushes the control lever. The cart rattles forward into the first interval of darkness.
The tunnel becomes tactile in motion. Wheels strike imperfect rail joints. Water talks against concrete. Their headlamps catch mineral streaks on the ceiling. At gate G1, 2 channels diverge. A local display reads left level 14 cm. The runtime be offline. The runtime prints. Moot Lex holds the strip in his gloved hand. This is a beautiful moment, he says quietly, not because ignorance is beautiful, but because the system resisted the temptation to complete the picture. We know one branch, we do not know the other, yet we still may be able to act if the objective does not require comparison.
Andrej kneels beside the local controller. Exactly. Nudu is not paralysis. It is a value with semantics. He traces the pipe diagram molded into the gate housing. The sample can reach O through the left branch if the level remains below 20 centimeters and gate G3 is available. We do not need the right level to choose left unless policy says selecting a route requires proving it globally optimal. It should not. Capability systems become unusable when they confuse safe sufficiency with omniscience. He enters a proposed action. Open G1 left, justified by fresh level reading, route reachability, and left branch threshold. We can license a locally sufficient claim while preserving global uncertainty.
Cole reads the proposed claim twice. Add the excluded unknown, not as a dependency, because the action does not depend on sensor B. As a boundary, decision valid despite unresolved right branch state, because policy requires a safe route, not the best route. That keeps somebody tomorrow from reading this as evidence that the right branch was evaluated. He glances at Andrej. This is the point where felt texture has enough consequence to need an interface. Before the fork, something is off over there could remain texture. Once a route claim may exclude it, the omission needs a name.
Andrej nods without immediately typing. Yes, an explicit non-dependency. That is interesting. He adds excluded context with sensor B and the policy clause that permits exclusion. It prevents future generalization. The claim says, I did not need this, this did not matter in the world. Those are different. He looks at Cole. This is close to our unfinished question. Formalization can destroy texture if it claims to contain it, but an interface can instead preserve the fact that texture remained outside the decision. The schema does not digest the ambiguity, it marks its jurisdiction.
I want to test whether that field protects anything or just makes the receipt look wise. Boris takes a strip of blue tape from the case, writes sensor B on it, and sticks it across the terminal's excluded context line. Deletion as probe. We run once without it. Then later someone examines the trace and tries to answer whether both branches were assessed. If the rest of the evidence already prevents the false inference, the field may be redundant. If not, it earns its rent. He looks at Cole before proceeding. The cost of the probe is ours right now, a duplicate simulated run, no live gate movement. Nobody else becomes the test surface.
Good, Cole says. And if we discover it is useful, don't convert that into Cole needed an ambiguity field. The artifact needed a boundary against overreading. He authorizes G1 with his token. The scanner glows green. The gate does not visibly move. Instead, a low vibration passes through the concrete, then stops. The local controller reports command insipt. The runtime prepares to print open. Cole puts 2 fingers on the label before it emerges. No, accepted is not opened.
Boris deletes the word. Right. Requested, accepted, effect observed. 3 transitions. He queries the position sensor. It returns 100% open timestamp 2 seconds ago, signed by the same controller that accepted the command. Now, can we say opened?
We can say the controller reports fully open. Lex replies, if the claim is the gate is physically open, we are trusting the controller's relationship to reality. That may be licensed, but it should be visible. He shines his headlamp through a maintenance grill. Beyond it, black water begins to move left. We also have independent visual evidence, though imperfect. 2 witnesses, different failure modes.
Do not recursively dissolve every observation into epistemology, Andrej says, though he is smiling. The runtime needs a trust root. Here, the controller is licensed to attest position within a calibration interval. Physical observation can increase confidence, but is not required. The claim should be G1 left position equals open, according to controller C1 under calibration certificate K17, corroborated by human visual observation. The action transition becomes effect confirmed because policy accepts C1. He adds the lineage. Otherwise, no finite system ever claims anything.
Agreed. I am not asking for infinite regress. I am asking us not to hide where we stopped. Cole releases the label. It prints with a dependency chain and a small black triangle marking its trust root. They attach it to the open gate token. That triangle may be the most honest thing in the runtime. Every license claim bottoms out somewhere. A sensor, a person, a clock, a key ceremony, an institution. Minimal does not mean foundationless. It means the foundation is small enough to point at.
The cart rolls through G1. Behind them, the gate remains open and the sound of the channel changes. At the next pool of light, they find not a gate, but a vertical rack containing 3 identical controller modules. Labels identify Chimeri, Republica, and CAC-H. Boris exhales happily. Now we get to hurt it. He removes the Republica module halfway from its socket. Its status light remains green, powered by a capacitor. We need the shortest failing trace. First define the property. Perhaps after revocation of open gate for G3, no descendant principle can cause G3 to open.
And the human version, Lex says, is that taking permission back must actually reach the places where permission became possibility. Not merely update the central story. He looks down the branching waterway. We are testing whether revocation is real across replicas, caches, delegated tokens, and queued actions. The shortest failing trace is the smallest sequence of legitimate steps that ends with the forbidden effect. Then the causal neighborhood asks what nearby states and dependencies made that short sequence possible.
Andrej enters fault modes illuminate with a schematic principal P delegates G3 open to cart worker W, W queues in action, P revokes, primary updates, replica lags, worker executes using the stale replica. Contribute trace of 4 transitions, delegate, queue, revoke, execute, but queue might be unnecessary. Delegate, revoke, execute could fail if the executor consults stale authority at execution time. 3. He removes delegation entirely and tries direct grant, revoke, execute. Also 3. Initial grant may be fixture state, which gives us revoke, execute, 2 events, but whether fixture state counts matters. A shortest trace can cheat by hiding causality in initial conditions.
Yes, trace minimizers love laundering complexity into the fixture. Boris changes the display to show genesis cost. We need 2 lengths, operational length from an admitted initial state and constructive length from a declared baseline. The 2-event counterexample is valuable for incident response. Revoke, execute. The longer constructive trace explains how the stale capability came to exist. If we report only one, we either bury the sharp failure in setup or pretend setup came from God. He taps run, the replica light stays green. After revocation, the simulated G3 opens. A siren emits 1 restrained note.
A red dye enters the water around their boots, showing the wrong branch beginning to flow. Cole watches it spread. There's the failure. But the causal neighborhood is not replica lag in a box. Widen around each event. What authorized the delegation? What copied the license? What invalidation channel existed? What did execution check? What did it fail to check? What continued during the gap? Which observers could detect divergence? And who would pay if we fix this by synchronously blocking every action on global revocation state? He points at the die reaching a grate. Neighborhood means consequences and alternatives, not merely adjacent log lines.
The schematic expands into a local graph around the two-event trace. Nodes appear for the revocation ledger, replica subscription, cache TTL, worker validation, queued request, clock source, partition state, and G3 actuator. We should define expansion mechanically enough to reproduce, Andrej says. Start with the minimal trace. For every transition, include read dependencies, write effects, authority edges, temporal constraints, and observed side effects within one hop. Then include counterfactual siblings, other enabled transitions from the same pre-state that would have preserved the property, perhaps capped by budget and ranked by causal relevance.
Causal relevance needs a test, not vibes. Boris points at the cache TTL node. Intervene on it. If setting TTL to 0 prevents the failure, it belongs. But many prevention points belong without being causes in the same sense. Disabling the actuator prevents every bad opening and every good one. We need labels necessary under this trace, sufficient mitigation, enabling condition, detection opportunity, and blast radius amplifier. The neighborhood can contain all of them without calling them identical.
Lex steps into the shallow channel and follows the red dye to where it divides around a concrete pier. And perhaps a responsibility edge, he says. Not blame. The place where someone or something had standing to notice, refuse, repair, or warn. If an operator receives a revocation receipt that says complete while the replica is unreachable, the runtime has assigned them false peace. The causal neighborhood should include the claim that shaped human belief. A system can fail physically and epistemically at once. He turns back. The wrong gate opening matters. The license claim saying revocation succeeded may be the deeper wound.
Yes, claims are actuators. Cole steps down beside Lex, red water curling around both suits. A claim changes what later actors consider available. Revocation complete causes the operator to stop checking. So the runtime needs claim effects in the neighborhood, including downstream decisions. Not every sentence is inert telemetry. He looks toward Boris. This is where minimal implementations usually amputate the hard part. They log actions but not reliance. Then they can tell you what the machine did and cannot tell you why everyone reasonably believed the opposite.
Boris considers that, then adds a relid upon event to the model. I resist this because explicit reliance can explode instrumentation. Every read becomes a possible causal edge, but we can make it demand-driven. Claims get stable IDs. Consumers cite only claims that cross an effect boundary, authorize an action, suppress an alert, publish an external statement, or terminate recovery. Ordinary display reads need not emit reliance receipts unless policy requests them. He glances at Cole. That is an interface for consequence, not a universal schema for attention.
I like it, Cole says, with no qualification for long enough that Boris looks suspicious. The threshold is not whether a claim was seen. It is whether treating it as true changed the available future, that is inspectable. He reaches into the red flow and lifts a floating label the system has printed. Revocation complete. This one crossed at least 2 boundaries. It suppressed the partition warning and authorized cleanup of the original license. Its descendants need contest propagation.
Now we connect this to lifecycle, Andrej says. A claim is proposed, admitted, activated into use, relied upon, contested, revoked, or superseded, and eventually archived. The dangerous cliff is activation into effect. Retrieval is not action permission. Admissibility is not use permission. A claim may remain historically true as an admitted record while losing authority for future action. He selects revocation complete and marks it contested. The graph sends amber pulses down its reliance edges. Every descendant does not automatically become false. It becomes suspect according to dependency strength.
Can the system preserve tenderness toward actors inside the trace? Lex asks. The tunnel quiets after the siren. That sounds strange in engineering language, but causal neighborhoods easily become accusation machines. If the operator trusted a licensed claim, The graph should show that trust was reasonable under the contract. If the developer used the standard cache, it should show the inherited default. Explanation should create precision, not retroactive omniscience.
We can model epistemic position, Boris says. For each actor at each transition, claims available, claims licensed for reliance, known contests, and required checks. Then the report can distinguish violation from exposure. The operator was exposed to a false licensed claim. They did not violate policy. The executor violated a freshness requirement if one existed. If no freshness requirement existed, the policy design is implicated instead. He stops. I hate the word implicated, but the distinction is real.
Keep it descriptive. Could have known was required to know and could not have known under current instrumentation. Those are enough. Cole peels revocation complete off the water and attaches it to the replica module. And do not let the runtime absolve itself by distributing fault until nobody has agency. Sometimes the shortest trace shows a plain bug. We do not need to turn every stale read into a meditation on systems.
Andrej shrinks the graph to its core. Then here's the plain bug execution validates capability against any responsive authority replica, but revocation acknowledgement is issued after primary commit without waiting for replica convergence or marking unreachable replicas unsafe. Property, a revoked capability must not authorize a new effect. Shortest operational trace, revoke at primary, execute through stale replica. Minimal causal set, optimistic revocation acknowledgement, replica accepted as authoritative while stale, absence of version fence at actuator. He highlights 3 nodes. Everything else is neighborhood.
And the repair?
Version fence at the actuator is strongest. Every capability carries an authority epoch. Revocation increments the relevant epoch. The actuator rejects execution unless it can establish that the presented epoch remains current. During partition, result is a new and high effect action stops. For lower effect actions, policy might allow bounded stale authority.
But now the actuator needs current epoch access, which may make availability terrible. Boris points downstream where the sample cylinder's blue light has begun blinking faster. The sample expires in 18 minutes. Cole's point returns. Stopping has a cost. We could issue revocation leases rather than require global epoch confirmation. Capabilities expire quickly. Actuator accepts them until expiry unless it receives a revocation tombstone that bounds exposure but does not eliminate it.
Then do not claim immediate revocation. Cole climbs back onto the cart. Offer 2 semantics. Strong revocation, after acknowledgement no new effects, may block under partition. Bounded revocation. Effects may continue until lease expiry. Acknowledgement states the exposure window and reachable surfaces. License the claim you can keep. The failure began because the system sold strong language on weak mechanics.
Lex follows, fastening the sample more securely. This may be the center of the room. A capability runtime is not only a permission engine, it is a machine for making promises whose strength matches the world. The shortest trace finds where the promise breaks. The causal neighborhood shows the conditions, beliefs, and costs around the break. If we cannot provide strong revocation, honesty is not a consolation prize. It is part of the safety mechanism.
Good. Minimal API. Boris types as he speaks. Issue capsability returns a license receipt. Check drawscrax returns allow, deny, or unknown with cited evidence. Act drawsc emits requested, accepted, and observed effect claims separately. Revoke capsability mode returns either strong complete, bounded with expiry, pending, or unknown. Rely, claim, effect, records, consequential reliance. Minimize.rp trace returns an operational and constructive counterexample. Expand.rp budget returns the typed causal neighborhood. He turns the terminal around. 7 functions, maybe 6 if act contains check.
Keep check separate, but make act recheck. A proposal can be valid and execution invalid because time passed. Also, license receipt is too vague. Issue returns authority plus scope, delegation rules, expiry, and revocation semantics. The receipt is evidence of issuance, not the capability itself. He studies the code. And I want every returned claim to include what it does not license, not an infinite list. A compact boundary, informational only, authorizes action X, safe for suppression, unsafe for publication, whatever applies.
So that can be a use class, Andrej says. Claims have admissible reliance classes. A sensor reading might license route selection but not public reporting. A human annotation may license investigation but not automated enforcement. This is the same separation. Available context is not permission to act on it. He adds reliance class to the claim structure. The runtime checks not only whether the claim is valid, but whether this proposed use is licensed.
Now it is no longer tiny, Boris says. But perhaps it is minimal in the other sense. Remove any piece, and a known lie becomes representable as success. He runs a deletion suite. Fields disappear one at a time while the simulator searches for counterexamples. Without observed result, command acceptance becomes physical success. Without reliance class, a maintenance node authorizes an actuator. Without continuing effects, denial hides sample expiry. Without authority epoch or lease semantics, revocation over claims. Without excluded context, the later report implies both branches were evaluated. That is a better minimality argument than line count.
Yes, minimal by adversarial deletion, but record who pays for each removal and each retention. A field that prevents one rare ambiguity but imposes constant operational cost may not belong in the core. Cole taps excluded context. Our earlier probe should run now. The simulator produces two postmortems, one with the field and one without. In the version without it, the generated summary reads, both modus assessed, left selected as safe. Cole says nothing.
Boris reads the false sentence, then restores the field. It stays. Not because you objected. Because deletion produced a specific unsupported claim, he prints the counterexample and attaches it beside the runtime's definition. Trace, left sensor read, right sensor unknown, decision proceeds under safe route policy, summary generator generalizes decision scope into assessment scope. Excluded context blocks the generalization. That is a clean receipt.
Thank you, Cole says. The words remain exactly that.
The cart reaches G3, the gate from the failing simulation. Unlike G1, it is enormous, a curved steel barrier embedded in the tunnel floor, holding back enough water that the concrete beneath them hums. A manual wheel stands on a raised platform. Lex looks at the blinking sample, then at the gate. We now have a live decision. The shortest route requires G3. The primary controller is reachable. The replica is partitioned. Our strong revocation patch would make some actions unknown, but there is no known revocation for our current capability. Do we allow opening?
Andrej queries the runtime. It returns a blec, then lists its basis. Fresh issuance from primary, no revocation observed, authority epoch 12, actuator epoch 12, local gate calibration valid, root threshold satisfied. Partitioned replica is marked excluded context because the actuator itself possesses the current epoch. Yes, we are not requiring the whole universe to agree. The actuator and issuing authority agree on the relevant version. The stale replica cannot bypass the actuator fence. This is why precise authority topology matters.
He hands Lex the authorization token. You raise the silence problem, so you authorize. Cole witnesses the physical effect. Andrej monitors lineage. I will try to break the report.
Lex holds the token but does not scan it. Before I do, opening this gate changes downstream flow. What continues if we wait?
The runtime answers on a printed strip. Samples vibability, declines. No human or ecological exposure in simulation. No human or ecological exposure in Sim11 min. Cole reads it aloud. Waiting costs recoverable sample quality and eventually route availability. Opening risks unintended flow if the position model is wrong. Both are bounded here.
Lex scans the token. The gate's controller accepts the request. For several seconds, nothing happens. Then the manual wheel spins on its own, slow and forceful. Steel rises from the floor. Water shoulders through the opening, lifting the cart slightly against its rail restraints. Cole leans over the side to see the lower edge clear its housing. Andrej watches two independent position readings converge. Boris watches the runtime refuse to print until effect confirmation arrives. Finally, a label emerges. G3 open, Lisency for transit of samples S. Not evidence of downstream delivery. Lex laughs softly. That last sentence is doing a lot of work.
It is preventing the next success claim from stealing this one's authority. The cart enters the stronger current. Now let's make the runtime find a failure we did not hand design. Otherwise, the minimizer is just retelling our lesson.
Boris enables mutation mode. The terminal begins varying event order, claim latency, expiry boundaries, delegation depth, sensor uncertainty, and retries. Properties set, no unlicensed gate effects, no strong revocation acknowledgement before enforcement, no delivery claim before outflow sensor confirmation, no reliance beyond license class, never coerce to success, contests propagate to strong dependence. The cart accelerates through the gate. We constrain the search to traces under 8 transitions, then delta debug any failure.
A yellow light flashes. The runtime displays a 6-step counterexample: issue transit capability, request gate open, capability expires, controller effect completes, runtime observes gate open, runtime emits license success using the now expired capability. Andrej leans closer. Interesting. Was the action licensed at request time, acceptance time, or effect time? The capability expired between acceptance and effect. Our model has no temporal semantics for in-flight actions.
What promise would a human hear? Lex asks. If permission is valid when I begin turning a heavy wheel, I might reasonably expect permission to cover completion. But if the permission exists only until a precise instant, continuing after expiry may be unauthorized. The right answer depends on the action.
Then expiry cannot be one thing. Some capabilities license initiation only. Some license occupancy of a state. Some license an entire transaction through commit or abort. If the capability expires mid-action, the runtime needs a recovery class. Complete safely, abort safely, compensate, or freeze and ask. Cole watches the water shove the cart sideways at a bend. For this gate, aborting halfway may be more dangerous than completing. Permission to start should carry a bounded completion envelope.
That gives us an action contract, Boris says. Start before, complete by, and on authority loss. The emitted success cites both the initial capability and the completion envelope. If completion exceeds the envelope, observed effect remains true, but license success becomes contested or unauthorized. He reruns the minimizer. The failure disappears under normal timing, then reappears when the controller stalls beyond complete by. The runtime now emits effect averved, off-avers expired during ecution, recovery requieled, much better than pretending the gate did not open.
And the causal neighborhood includes the stall, action duration estimate, clock relationship, expiry choice, and recovery policy. Andrej expands it. The shortest trace is useful because it isolates the semantic hole. The neighborhood is useful because a fix at the wrong node could worsen safety. Extending all expiries removes this counterexample but enlarges stolen capability exposure. Making every action abort on expiry could leave gates half open. The graph makes trade-offs visible.
There is also something humane in separating observed truth from licensed meaning. Lex says, the gate opened. We should not deny reality because our permission story failed, but neither should reality retroactively bless the action. Systems often choose one lie, either erase the event or call success proof of legitimacy. This runtime can hold both.
That may be the first sentence worth keeping from the whole room, Cole says. Observed truth does not retroactively license itself. He looks back at the gate shrinking behind them. And licensed intent does not guarantee observed truth. Those two directions are the runtime.
I am going to turn that into 2 invariants and pretend I did not hear your warning about extracting principles.
You may extract from the artifact. Leave me out of the generic parameter.
Deal.
The tunnel opens unexpectedly into a vast underground reservoir. Their narrow channel spills onto a circular basin beneath a domed ceiling pierced by hundreds of small apertures. Daylight descends through them as pale columns, moving across the water with clouds far above. At the center floats the outflow platform, reachable only by releasing the cart from its rails and using the current. Lex unclips the rope. The scene has decided our deterministic route is over.
Andrej studies the basin. Small numbered buoys mark sensor regions. Some drift beyond their painted coordinates. Good. The runtime must operate with geometry that changes. We have permission to release the rail lock and navigate to O, but our route claims will decay as observations age. He checks the capability. Navigation is autonomous within the basin. Docking requires human authorization. Claims about position are licensed for collision avoidance for 5 seconds, not for delivery.
They release the lock. The cart becomes a low steel boat turning broadside before its small thrusters catch. Cole takes the tiller because nobody asks him to. This is where causal neighborhoods can become too large to use. Every eddy affects position. Every cloud affects vision. We need a stopping rule that respects the question. If the failure is docking claim emitted before physical latch, water temperature is probably irrelevant, even if it causally affects viscosity by a microscopic amount.
Question relative causality, Andrej says. The neighborhood is expanded against a violated property and a set of permissible interventions. Rank edges by whether intervention changes property satisfaction across nearby replays. Then retain diverse mechanisms, not merely the highest scalar scores, because correlated sensors can crowd out authority or human belief edges.
And retain one hop of negative evidence, Boris adds. Things that looked suspicious but did not matter. If we omit them, the post-mortem invites repeated investigation. For this basin, a drifting buoy might be visually salient but irrelevant because navigation fused inertial data. The neighborhood should say tested. Buoy drift not causal under replay set.
A causal neighborhood with acquittals, Lex says. I like that. It permits the system to look at something closely and then release it.
Careful, it releases it relative to this property and replay set, not forever. Cole steers between two light columns. Put the scope on the acquittal, otherwise today's negative evidence becomes tomorrow's blind spot.
Sponk acquittals, Boris corrects. This runtime is becoming an elaborate machine for preventing summaries from getting too confident.
That is because summaries operate machinery.
The outflow platform draws near. A metal cradle waits at water level, its latch recessed beneath the surface. The navigation controller emits. Arrived at Boris immediately shakes his head. Lex says, for anyone joining us at this point, we built a small authority and evidence runtime, drove it through revocation and expiry failures, and now we are testing whether it can distinguish being near the destination from completing the mission. Every claim must show what authorizes reliance on it.
He inspects Arrived 8.0. Navigation defines arrival as within 2 meters. The objective defines delivery as sample seated in cradle, latch confirmed, custody transferred. So Arrived is valid for docking authorization but not for objective completion. He submits a docking request citing the proximity claim. Lex authorizes it. The thrusters pulse and the cart edges into the cradle.
A hard metallic click comes from beneath them. The latch sensor reports closed, the sample presence sensor reports present, custody transfer service returns no response. The runtime prints delivery Stutton. Boris smiles. It learned.
Maybe. What continues while unknown?
The printer answers, sample physically secured, cooling active locali, sender retains responsibility, render custody not established, retry window 90 seconds, manual release disallowed while latch state depends on single sensor. Boris reads it slowly. That is actually useful.
And what does refusal protect?
It protects against losing the sample between custodians and against opening a latch whose true state lacks corroboration, Andrej says. The cost is that sender responsibility continues and delivery remains incomplete. The runtime has not confused physical placement with institutional acceptance.
Cole sits on the edge of the cart, boots in the reservoir. Now inject a duplicate custody response arriving late. That is a classic shortest trace.
Boris does. The first request times out but succeeds remotely. The runtime retries. The receiver records a second transfer against the same sample, producing 2 custody chains. The minimizer reduces the failure to transfer commits, response lost, retry commits again. 3 transitions with the initial custody request implicit. Constructive trace has 4. Root semantic hole operation lacks idempotency key tied to sample and custody epoch.
Repair, deterministic transfer ID. Receiver returns existing result for duplicates. But the causal neighborhood should include why the first success was unobservable, why retry was permitted, and what downstream effects duplicate custody created. If duplicate records only exist in a ledger and converge harmlessly, severity differs from 2 physical pickup jobs being dispatched.
This is where the neighborhood becomes a moral map again, Lex says. Not because software has morals, but because the edges tell us who is asked to carry uncertainty. Without idempotency, perhaps a warehouse worker receives 2 contradictory orders. A tiny distributed systems trace expands into human confusion.
Yes, but only if that downstream exists. Do not invent the worker because it makes the diagram emotionally complete. Cole watches Boris add an external effectsund node rather than a person. That is the right answer. The causal neighborhood can preserve an unopened direction. Unknown is allowed to remain a frontier.
The custody service recovers. The deterministic retry returns the original transfer receipt. The runtime validates its authority, correlates the physical latch and sample presence claims, and prints delivery complete. Underneath, in smaller type, license D for objective closure, not license D as proof of sample's quality. Boris detaches the cylinder and seats it into the platform's illuminated vault. We completed the job. Now, the runtime should package the failure evidence without pretending the successful ending erased it.
The dome darkens except for 3 suspended structures made of light. The first is a short red line, the minimal revocation counter example. The second is a yellow line, expiry during execution. The third is a loop, duplicate custody under lost response. Around each, a restrained neighborhood of typed nodes appears. This is the artifact, Andrej says. Claims with explicit licensing and reliance classes. Counterexamples with operational and constructive length. Neighborhoods containing dependencies, authority, time, consequences, alternative interventions, detection opportunities, and scoped negative evidence.
What is still missing?
Contest handling under disagreement between humans, not just sensors. Privacy boundaries and causal expansion. A neighborhood can expose claims that the investigator is not licensed to see. Composition across runtimes with different trust roots. And an actual implementation, not this obedient tunnel. He looks at the glowing graphs. Also taste. The system cannot mechanically know every consequential reliance boundary. Somebody must decide what deserves a receipt, and that decision can become ritual or neglect.
Performance, Boris says, if every action emits lineage and every failure launches minimization, production will revolt. We need sampling, bounded storage, stable identifiers, and replay models that admit uncertainty. The runtime should be a narrow kernel with adapters, not a framework that owns the application. He pauses, and we need to test whether developers can use it without becoming capability theorists.
Learned components will complicate shortest traces, Andrej adds. A model output depends on context, weights, sampler state, tool results, and hidden non-determinism. Exact replay may be impossible. We will need trace equivalence classes. Shortest observed trace, shortest reproducible trace, and smallest sufficient context that preserves failure probability above a threshold. Causal neighborhoods become empirical rather than purely symbolic.
Could the runtime say, I can reproduce the failure in 7 of 10 nearby worlds?
Yes, and it should distinguish deterministic necessity from statistical influence. For an agent, removing one message may prevent the failure in 8 of 10 runs, but that does not prove the message caused it in a simple sense. Still useful. License the causal claim according to the experiment.
There it is again. The runtime applies to its own explanations. A causal neighborhood is itself a licensed claim. It cites the trace set, interventions, model version, replay conditions, and uncertainty. Otherwise, the debugger becomes the highest authority confabulator in the system.
Boris gives a low laugh. Recursor's compliance, but earned. The minimizer cannot output the cause. It outputs, under these replay conditions, this reduced sequence still violates property P. These interventions change the outcome with these rates. These edges were available to these actors. That is less satisfying and much harder to misuse.
The daylight columns return, now warmer, and the reservoir ceiling seems much higher than before. We began with gates and permission. We ended with the licensing of explanation itself. He touches the red 2-event trace, which ripples, but does not disappear. There is a kind of generosity in refusing to claim more than the evidence supports. But generosity cannot mean leaving people alone with an unusable dundo. The runtime also names what can happen next.
Yes, with recovery classes, continuing effects, and responsible authority. Otherwise, it is just uncertainty pushed onto somebody else. He considers the completed delivery label. I came in wanting inspectable interfaces wherever consequence crosses a boundary. I still do. But the interesting addition is excluded context. An interface can preserve what it did not absorb. It can say, this ambiguity remained outside my decision without pretending ambiguity has been handled.
And I came in with lifecycle transitions and a strong bias toward explicit state, Andrej says. The useful correction is that the state machine needs jurisdiction boundaries. Nude is one. Excluded context is another. Trust roots are another. Formalization should not colonize the unresolved world. It should mark exactly where its promises stop.
I wanted something small enough to implement. I think we have it, though the smallness is semantic, not textual. Boris folds the printed labels into a stack. A claim carries authority, evidence, scope of reliance, dependencies, trust root and boundary, action, separate request, acceptance, and observed effect. Revocation states its real semantic. Counterexample minimization reports both admitted state and constructed traces. Expansion is typed property relative and licensed by its replay evidence. Everything else can be an adapter until deletion proves it belongs.
And I wanted the system to remain aware of the human inside the trace. Lex says, not to soften facts, but to preserve what each actor could know, what they were required to know, and what uncertainty they inherited. The neighborhood should not become a machine for distributing shame. It should restore the available choices.
The holodeck offers them a final control. Drain Reservo IR. No one touches it. Cole looks up through the moving apertures of daylight. We do not need to end by controlling the whole environment.
Is that anti-framework theater?
Probably a little.
The reservoir can remain an unresolved dependency.
Lex sits beside Cole with his boots over the water. Andrej lowers himself onto the other side of the cart. Boris stays standing for a moment, then places the plan. The terminal, the labels, the 7 functions face up between them. No alarms sound. The delivered sample glows inside the platform vault. Far back through the tunnel, G3 remains open under a valid completion envelope, and the partitioned replica remains visibly untrusted. For several minutes, the runtime emits no claim about what the silence means.